The Jazz have a new general manager. Let's review what he said to us. It's the focus of today's edition of Tip-Off. Boom, 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 boom. Huge day of hoops. 4 really good Olympic Games. Boom, 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 boom. AK in Russia versus Lithuania. Boom, 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 boom. You get to see a little Spain, little Brazil, little Argentina. Boom, 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 boom. U.S. should blast Australia if they decide to play the defense. Boom, 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 boom. It is a good day to just go out and watch a bunch of ball. Watching Andre right now doing his usual thing as Russia plays Lithuania. I have gone back through all of the interviews I did with Dennis Lindsey. There are 2 of them that are available to you. One is available at UtahJazz.com. It's about a 10-minute one-on-one. The other is a longer version with Scotty G that's available also at WeAreUtahJazz.com, but also via iTunes or Stitcher Radio app. So those are there for you. I strongly suggest taking the time. There's a good O'Connor interview on the backside as well. And if you listen closely, I think he reveals a lot about who he is, what he believes, and why the Jazz hired him. Big picture. It was I probably didn't have a tone of major importance yesterday at this point. Not that I didn't think it was a big deal, but what I think everybody kind of momentarily was caught up is, what does this mean about Kevin O'Connor? What does this mean about Kevin O'Connor? And I don't think it means much at this point. O'Connor, I think, will be doing the same. He just has another person. The Jazz have always been running the thinnest staff in the NBA in the front office, and it at some point was just too much work for too little people, and the Jazz did a nice job of adding somebody in on the top side of it, and getting a high-quality, well-respected person around the NBA. I still believe that. I still think that's what really has taken place here. There's no cultural change. There's no adjustment to the way things are done. And while everything has always been a group decision, I still think it's going to fall. The buck is going to fall on O'Connor at the final moment of things, and that's so that things aren't going to be that different. I think we'll still have the same aggressiveness we've seen out of Kevin over the last 2 years, and the structure still seems to be very, very similar to what it was in the past. So in that sense, I kind of hold a little bit that it just what I wasn't over, but it wasn't as big a day. But when you got in that room, and Gail Miller's there and Greg Miller's there, I think that's when you suddenly realized the magnitude of the day yesterday for the future of the organization. That this was a major hire. Some of the talk around the league was that people were surprised that Dennis came because he was making a lot of money in San Antonio, and so people were surprised the Jazz paid enough to bring him. This is a guy that's been interviewed for numerous jobs, maybe sometimes not offered, sometimes offered. Phoenix supposedly wanted him. He decided not to. Orlando, I think he got overlooked by the end of it. He was in the Philly mix here recently, so the Jazz went and got their guy before somebody else did. And it did begin to have a feeling that this guy could be around for an awful long time, and the next very important name in the future of the Utah Jazz, from the Scott Layden to Kevin O'Connor, and now to Dennis Lindsey. So I think it was a very significant day. That became clear. The more I talk around the league about Lindsey, I interacted with him yesterday. He seemed fine. He was trying to be very sharp. He was being very respectful to everybody he met. He certainly wanted to make sure he didn't act as though I was coming from the Spurs and he had anything to change about the Jazz. He worked very hard to make sure he sent off the right messages and they were the correct messages to send, and now actions over the time will tell us whether how good he really is. I think the next step on this, and so that was all good. He was very polite. If I came across right, it's clear he fits. It clears everyone was eager to have him involved. That he and O'Connor see the game similarly. There was a very good quote by R.C. Buford just about the trustworthy of these two guys. Everyone I've talked to around the league, it's a great fit. And when I've been calling around to try to find out more, talk to certain people to find out more about Dennis or to get you guys interviews about Dennis, the people I'm calling know him. Oh, he's one of the best we've ever had. So high-quality guy, clearly trustworthy, very astute, basketball guy, has been for his life, and a basketball guy with the addition of analytics is clear. He's been highly exposed to him, as we talked about yesterday. Everything seems to line up well. We'll see over time how the decisions come down. But who is he? And I take from the interviews that I did with him, and you guys can do the same and see what jumped out at you, and I have a little bunch of scribbles down here. In no particular order, I'm going to just start grabbing some things that, going back and listening to 35 minutes of interviews that we had with him, or 25 minutes of interviews we had with him of what it was that he said. I thought what some of the main things I asked him, just trying to find out where he views the game. Defensive mindset. He talked about that a team has to have a defensive mindset. It has to be a work-based program. That, I think, comes from his background as a coach and realizing that you can give a coach all the talent in the world, but asking a coach to try to get somebody motivated who's not already motivated is very problematic. And so you have to have guys that you're not pulling along, that are there as a work-based program. Execution-oriented offense. Well, that's what we do. That's not surprising, considering where he came from in Houston, and his head coach there was Jeff Van Gundy and Greg Popovich. These aren't stunning. He spent 4 years with Tom Thibodeau, who's the best defensive coach in the NBA right now, as one of his assistants. And then I thought it was interesting when he talked about trigger guys. That the offense, this is really, I thought, was a kind of understanding his philosophy. As much as everything's execution-based, you have to have guys with the trigger. Guys who make the defenses move and adjust and rotate and get off their spot a little bit. And then those guys, he kept saying, had to trigger quickly. And that's going to be very interesting to see how he evaluates Al Jefferson and where Kevin's point of view on Al Jefferson is compared to where, and this might be a case where Al Jefferson to the Jazz, their execution is so post-centric, and they need to have a guy in the post, and that I don't know this, I'm making this up, but that they feel Al really does a lot of things for him because he gets the ball in the post. And Dennis comes in with a different point of view and says, hey, wait a sec, we can trigger this the same way, and we can trigger it more quickly, and Al takes an awful long time, and all of these things. And suddenly you have a different point of view in the building in regards to whether or not Al Jefferson is a major piece for the future. I'm making this whole thing up hypothetically, but this is where he'll be, of value is when you get that different opinion. But I do think, I kept running through, I think Al's the most interesting piece of how you look at it. It also might be the opposite. It might be that he suddenly sees Al as a trigger guy that makes the defense react, and he sees someone of that sort, and Al works hard, he's work-based, he does all the right things. To me, for all we know, he's going to find him more valuable than a guy that the Jazz traditionally have loved, like a Millsap, who he says, wait a sec, he can't trigger anything offensively. He's defensive-based, but he's overwhelmed size-wise, and he actually hurts us in, various things. I don't know these. I'm making these up, but this is where having that extra voice is going to be very important. Some of the other things they talked about, unselfish triggerman. He referenced that triggerman a bunch of times. He referenced unselfish triggerman, triggerman quickly. He's going to like a guy like Gordon Hayward who moves the ball in that fashion. By the way, Kevin OConnor in the podcast about Gordon Hayward, very fascinating about his development and his mindset. Make sure you go grab that. In regards to Derek Favors, when I asked, it was really one of the only questions specifically about a player. He said he made 6 or 7 plays that made our knees shake. And I'm assuming those were probably defensive plays in that Spurs series. Remember, this guy's with the Spurs, prepared for us. And I think he really, at that point, is preparing much like a coach with his background and sees things. We're going to cultivate new areas. He's not going to change the culture, but he's going to cultivate new areas. Much of that analytics. The one thing I loved he talked about was medical research. Detroit has been really quite healthy. Phoenix might be onto something medically. So you're seeing an increase in kind of the medical research stuff. Are we doing things the way we need to? Do we do things too traditionally? Is there some other way that other teams, i.e. really that Phoenix is getting guys healthy that we need to figure out and learn? Phoenix has done a great job with that. We have a great staff in Mark McCowan and Gary Briggs. Do they need help? Are there other people to them? Again, we're probably a little understaffed in some of those areas. What are those areas? So keep an eye on that. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't end up with another hire of some capacity here, that Dennis comes in and says, wow, you guys, this is really, we're short in this area, and the Millers have shown that they're committed to making sure that this team wins, and this is a good example of it, that they add another person along the way. Uh, the league is about individual merit, he said. The league is, he's absolutely right. We can get all fall in love with our execute. You just got to be really damn good. It's individual merit in a team environment, but you got to have talent, and that really matches O'Connor. And I think that's been maybe the biggest change we've seen in the last 2 years with the Jazz since Sloan left and O'Connor got a little bit more freedom to make the moves he wanted to make. Is our talent level's just way up, and it's not as based as much simply on the execution of the offense and whether you fit, but it's much more. Our talent level is very, very, very high right now. An identifiable playing style. And what he's really talking about there as a GM is if I'm going to acquire players, we talked about Danny Green and how the Spurs found him. He said, hey, we have an identifiable playing style. And so you can look at a guy like Green and see where he fits in. One of the comments I loved about Green is he said, and also, how does a piece add to our organization? And he pointed out that they really liked Green because he could defend point guards. That as a long, big, along two, they saw him as a guy who could defend point guards, and suddenly that was his value of the organization. Then other things clicked in to find this guy. So I think I thought that was a very interesting point that jumped out to me. He definitely referenced beyond the box score, which is a kind of the way analytical people, the analytical people kind of mention that we're going to look at just more than points and rebounds and what they do. Players that are committed, which is, I think, maybe one of the biggest keys. If a guy's not into what you're doing, and basically you go back to the Spurs and the trade of Richard Jefferson, where they unloaded Richard Jefferson and took back Steven Jackson, which, doesn't make a lot of sense and to some extent doesn't make analytical sense. But what it does do is you've got a guy who's not committed, who's not buying into what the coaches want, isn't doing it the way you want to do it. And in turn, you end up with guys that aren't committed. You got to have guys that are committed, and we're going to see that this year, frankly, with some of our free agency. By the way, KarlAnthony is just killing Lithuania right now. He is good. He's just a very good player, and he is playing at the power forward position. I'll be so curious of whether Minnesota uses him as they should as a 4. And I'm also, in retrospect, so curious if we should have found a way to use him more at the 4 and what he would have been able to do, because he's so incredibly worldly gifted. And I wonder in the NBA if you could really have won with him at the 4. He gets banged around, he gets hurt, and he doesn't play. I don't think so, but boy, is he skilled. All right, sorry, that was just an aside, so I haven't to turn the television on. Removing points per game was another way of looking things. I asked him what types of players. He wants guys who win. It's an obvious statement, but it's the question you have to ask about every player is, does he help us win? And I thought that was, when I do my top 100 players in the NBA list, it gets down to, does he help us win? And you have to ask. And, on the Shane Battier-Rudy Gay trade I asked him about, Shane Battier helped you win. And Rudy Gay, until recently, was not a guy that helped you win. So I think that you're seeing a nice – and Kevin views it the same way there. But I think there's some areas here where this is another voice in the room. This is somebody else who might say, hey, let's not go get that guy. Here's why. Or – here's somebody you might not have liked initially, but here's why I like him. And that's probably the most important. Kevin said he had a new playmate. And I think that's a great way to say it. And it's a burden on Kevin's unbearable. In the interview I did with him, I talked about how tired guys are, and I think he agreed. So there's the take on the day. It's another voice, and it's a good voice. It's a highly respected voice, and it's another point of view. And I think that's a good step in the right direction, and once again shows the commitment of winning from the Miller family to this organization and trying to do the best the Jazz can do. All right, that's tip-off. The Josh Howard story continues to be out there, but we'll touch on it tomorrow. See ya.